So a very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers of the day, Geeta Jain and Geetha Rajeev, on a very interesting topic, the art of storytelling. And a very warm welcome to all our audience, our members who joined in today, taken out the time to really listen to these distinguished speakers. And let's learn how to create engaging stories, how to not just learn, but also how to share our stories. And today we're going to learn how these stories are, going to be helpful, the way we go about, sharing our learnings, sharing our experiences, and why do these stories really matter. So very, very happy to have Geeta and Geeta here today. And before we start, again, a very warm welcome. I'd like to share with everyone here today that as the vision of Faridabad Management Association, we want to be one of the leading associations in promoting excellence in management and leadership. We are striving to create a dynamic community of professionals, business owners who are committed to advancing their skills and knowledge. And hence, we bring a variety of programs. The program that we are having today is under the Kaushal Vriddhi series. And similarly, there are so many other series that, we all bring to you from time to time, whether it be our leadership series, Abhivyakti, or our knowledge sessions under, Vriddhi, Kaushal Vriddhi series, or our wellness and joyful series, which is Arogyata and Anandmaya. So we aim to be a resource for all our members and our audiences to provide them with the tools and the support they need to succeed not only in their careers, but also make a positive impact in their organizations. For entrepreneurs, we bring entrepreneurial programs. We work with a variety of institutions and universities to impact at the grassroots level, where we are enabling students to create and, or rather develop an entrepreneurial mindset such that they're able to also create some kind of impact in the society and also for themselves. So with that, I welcome our distinguished speakers for the day. And I like to just share a little bit about their bios. Give me a minute. So to introduce Geeta Jain. Geeta Jain is the founder of Mentor Women, which is an initiative dedicated to mentoring women professionals. Along with a highly qualified and accomplished team of senior mentors, she is committed to supporting women professionals achieve their potential and excel in their careers. She's an experienced business leader with a proven track record of over 27 years in managing large organizations and leading diverse functions, including strategy, operations, client management, financial planning, analysis, and consulting. She has been in global leadership roles and is regarded highly by her colleagues for her talent management, inspirational leadership, work ethics, and driving business results. So welcome, Geeta. To introduce now Geetha Rajeev. She is an HR professional who has spent several years in the HR function in both manufacturing and ITES sector. She has a wide experience in the entire gamut of people practices, from talent development, engagement, workforce relations to performance management and industrial relations. In her last role, she was the HR leader of a business unit of a leading multinational company. She has a keen interest in leadership development and in fostering a healthy organization culture through innovative people strategies. In other roles, she has been a teacher, coach, and has also led initiatives related to women's welfare and well-being in the social sector. So welcome, Geeta and Geetha Rajeev. We are happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Saloni. Thank you for that generous introduction. I must say, one, of course, there's a good participation. I see the numbers increasing, so thank you. Hopefully it is of relevance to everybody. It's a topic that we feel intrigued by these days. It's a buzzword, but it's also very basic. So there's hopefully not an expectation of a whole new skill coming into play here. It is conversations, but just how we use those conversations and bring the best outcome of those. I see some very experienced, highly experienced senior people in the group who will who will be at much higher level in terms of this skill. And so I hope all of you can share your own experiences and what you believe is appropriate. And please bear with us as we share ours. It might not be quite as much as you know already. So with those words, we'll get started. I will use a PowerPoint. So I'm going to share my screen. If you allow me to do that, Saloni, I'll bring up my PowerPoint in a minute. Okay, so storytelling as a skill is something that's inherent in all of us. We grow up right from the early years of our childhood. We grow up listening to stories, and subconsciously we imbibe the art of storytelling. But many of us keep this art aside, back of our minds, to be used for our next generation, children, grandchildren, etc., not recognizing that can be made to use in every other dimension of our life. However, there are others who are particularly good at it. And that's where sometimes people look at somebody to say, oh, that person has fantastic communication skills. Largely, I think we are pointing to the person's ability to engage you in a story-like fashion. And that's what we want to talk about today. Yeah. As I mentioned to Saloni earlier, this seems to be a fantastic group with an objective. It's not just coming together for the sake of coming together. So you're obviously investing in a lot of development, learning, and reasons to connect. Kaushal Vriddhi as a series by itself sounds very appetizing, and I'm sure there's a lot you learn through this. This fits in very well with this, and we are very fortunate and privileged to be here with all of you. So thank you for giving us this opportunity. So since Saloni's done the introductions already, I will not do that. I had a slide just to quickly talk about ourselves, but we will move on. Why are we doing this workshop today? The objective is for us to understand why we focus on storytelling. And storytelling, as we visualize it in a traditional sense, is about, once upon a time, but this is not in that context. What we're saying is, how do we package communication, call it in the corporate buzzword, the word is elevator pitch, having an elevator pitch. And in a more common sense, we say storytelling. So why is it important? How do you build your story? And what is a good story? And I'm always the kind of person who starts, and I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. So it's always great to start with why. Why are you doing this? So let's get into that. Yeah. I'm going to play this brief 30-second ad here, and we'll see. But the reason why we're doing this is that we know that there is storytelling in different dimensions of our life. The most common one, apart from the entertainment industry, is the ads industry, wherein we know that practically every ad that has a good recall is one that has a very strong, powerful storyline. So let's just look at this 30-second ad here. Oops.
The one is very big. Number 2 is
दाग लगने से अगर कुछ अच्छा होता है तो दाग अच्छे हैं ना, सफिक्स दाग अच्छे हैं.
Okay, so here is an ad like any other ad, bringing home the message of talking about a product without necessarily mentioning too much about the product, but it gives you a certain connect. Yeah, there are ads that talk about the product. So for a similar product, let's say detergent, if the ad was to focus on the chemical properties which allow for the stain removal, if it were to talk about the market share, if it were to talk about how price competitive it is, or even the packaging, I doubt if any of us will have the same connect with it or a recall. I mean, for that matter, I don't know if any of you recall. And by the way, I'm saying this with a caveat. We're not by any means comparing products or ads or anything else. This is purely in the context of storytelling. If I were to go back to the direct competition of Surf, which was Tide. I don't know if any of you recall what the storyline there is. Do you? I mean, I don't know if anybody has a direct recall of what that is. The ad campaign uses a very popular Bollywood star. It talks about how well the stains get removed. It talks about it being the purest and the whitest and all of that. And this is the Tide ad, and you might want to look it up. Again, might be great and as an ad. I'm not an authority on that subject, but it does not. And Daag Achhe as a campaign, or Surf in the past also has used storytelling. If you remember, Kavita, was it?
Kavita ji. Yes.
Kavita ji in the ad campaigns in the past, they've had a way of engaging with the audience to make them feel like this is the product for them because they are able to relate to the character in the story, right? So that is one dimension of storytelling that we are all familiar with. And it's used again and again and again. In fact, the best ads that are voted as the best ads inherently have some fantastic, commendable stories behind them. Yeah, so that's one used case. Now, let's look at another one.
So, you know, to this group, if I were to just tell you about somebody, you can see all of this individual's, you know, what she is and what she's done, right? She's got a B from a particular college. She's got an ME. She's worked for 8 years in telco, helped found IT services, author, philanthropist, a mother of 2. Who comes to your mind? Who's the person? Obviously, somebody who's an engineer. Okay. So Suman's come up with Sudha Murthy. Suman, why do you recall that?
Because you heard so much about her.
Have you heard about her qualifications or have you heard about her?
Yeah, the story.
It's a lot to do with the stories that we've heard, right? The visualization when she said, I went to college. The principal didn't want me there because I was the only lady. And he says, why even bring her to this college? There are no washrooms, etc. So that's a visual that stays with you. And then she goes on to talk about having applied to telco and being told that it's a job only for men, then writing to the chairman then, J.R.D. Tata, and saying, why not? Them reconsidering her, right? So at different points of time, these little nuggets that we have seen of her life kind of sets her apart from all of the other, you know, wives who may have achieved as much, right? But Sudha Murthy shared through her stories these little nuggets of her life that we're easily able to visualize, and we're also able to relate to, right? How she managed to keep her children grounded. It could be so many things. She's not been shopping for so many years. It could be how she lent 10,000 rupees to help co-found Infosys. All of these stories, you know, are little things that put it together, and then that easy recall. So when we say Sudha Murthy, you're not just thinking about her as the Infosys founder's wife. There are so many other aspects of her, right? So that's the importance of storytelling. And she continues to amaze us with her stories. Little anecdotes, she comes on various shows, she shares these anecdotes, and we're able to relate to that.
Yep. So then that's what stays in our head, right? And not because she's a storyteller, but the fact is that exactly to what Geeta just mentioned, there is a context. We understand how she became an engineer, how she got into a male dominant or the only male only employment with telco. So being that context makes it unique. It makes you visualize what happened and visualize her life. Equally, there is an emotional connect. Emotional connect. As a woman, I connect very strongly because she had the courage and guts to speak up and, you know, be seen and heard. And empathy, I'm sure, from our male colleagues to say, you know what, she deserved to be have a seat on the table, and good for her that she fought for herself. So she's arousing a certain emotion. We're using her story just to, message in. But each time you do that exercise on a day-to-day basis, each time when you are conveying a message with a context, helping the audience to visualize that context, give them a reason that they can relate to your story, they can relate to the character of your story, chances are you've got a high level of engagement, and not just engagement, you've got a recall of that. Because otherwise, we are all like clones of each other. If you look at our LinkedIn profiles, if we look at our Facebook, apart from the fact that we might be wearing different clothes or whatever, everybody seems to have done similar things, achieved a lot of titles and trophies, but it's your story that sets you apart. I remember last year, beginning of last year, one of the corporates that we mentored two senior sales leaders from their team. And both of these leaders were heading up two different regions in the country. And through the coaching session, the first one, both of them were extremely highly accomplished, go-getter, very well regarded in the organization. And the first one talked to me about, how well she's performed and a little bit about her background, the accomplishments and qualifications and whatnot. The second lady spent a lot of time talking about how she was brought up, and she grew up in the most remotest of rural areas, how she used to go to the fields in the morning, then walk to the school, which was 5 miles away from where she lived, come back and have a set of chores at home. And she said, you know what, as a result of that, nothing surprises me. I'm up for anything. I don't take any rejections personally. I can go the extra mile for anything. I'm that dog with a bone. Now, having heard that story, even though I remember both of them to be highly accomplished, I have a recall of everything that she said to me. And therefore, if I were to meet with her again, there will be that level of connect in the first instance. Because she shared with me things that I could relate to or empathize with. So there is a human connect. And let's believe it, that people like to work with people, not numbers or data or machines or PowerPoints. When we go into a client meeting, they check you out first. They want to know who you are. They don't necessarily judge you purely by the presentation you carry. They judge you by who you are, what you speak of yourself with said or unsaid words. And therefore, that engagement and appreciation comes through, and the recall of your message comes through when you're able to weave the context, you're able to make it visual and build a connect. That's what we are saying is important. So in our day-to-day lives, and we've seen this enough times, even with the information that we just shared with Sudhamurthy, it's so much easier to communicate using facts and figures. It's so simple. Yet, people neither listen as well, nor do they remember. It's always what they listen to is that what they're looking for, that human connect, something that they can relate to, and they'll recall that part of it. That's how we all know it, right? That's how we behave, and that's how everybody else behaves as well. We know that. So why tell stories? A simple question is why tell stories? Stories being, if the data and facts were to be the bones, the stories are the flesh. It's not about once upon a time. It is the context. It is the visual. It is the reason, the empathy, the emotional reason for whatever happened and why it happened. Even in a customer escalation issue or an environment, if you're able to connect to that person and understand that person's concern at an emotional level, and then be prepared to respond at the same level, chances are you'll be able to de-escalate the issue compared to somebody bringing up facts to say how bad you service them, and then you putting up another set of facts to say, no, you're wrong, this is what I did. That's a no-go situation, right? So it is that ability to connect at that level that we see and we believe is the ideal way of communicating in most circumstances. Yeah. We are not pausing in between because I believe there is a Q&A right at the end, so we'll keep going. Geeta, what do you think?
Yes, so here's a scenario that we are presenting. So let's say there is an area that is where people need to be educated on the impact of global warming, climate change, and a group of environmentalists goes to that little town. They have two approaches to take, right? So here's the first approach. The first approach is they put up a lot of PowerPoint presentations, They give you the costs, they give them the causes of greenhouse gas. Why does it happen? This much of fuel, we are burning fossil fuels. And they start spewing out all of the facts, right? Temperature is rising by X% every year. It's been the hottest decade in so many thousands of years. This is what the hole in the ozone layer, this is happening. We are losing trees. So that's one approach, right? You bombard your audience with facts and figures. No, nothing wrong. All the facts and figures are right? But there is a lot. The other approach is you tell a story, right? You make it relatable. So if I ask those of you on the call today, what is it that you see here? Perhaps you're aware of the backstory as well, but what do you see here in this? Anybody? What does this look like standing in the sea, in the midst of all that seawater? It's a hand pump, right? Thank you, Sangeeta. But what's a hand pump doing in the middle of the sea? Right? And that's when somebody decided, a person who saw this photograph, he actually took his team and he says, what's a hand pump doing in the middle of the sea? Right? Your hand pump is meant to draw water, but why would you need saline water? So he went back and then realized, right, that this is an area in a coastal district of eastern India. It was a set of 7 villages called Sadbaya. And over a period of time, right, there was this person there, a youngster called Charan, and he recounted how when he was young and in school, the sea was 2 kilometers away from their house. They had about 3 acres of land where they cultivated some crops. They had cows and cattle and enough grass to feed them, all of that. And then within a period of 5 to 10 years, the sea crept in because of rising sea levels, sea erosion, etc. And it just swallowed up their village. And once that happened, of course, they got into, the government helped them, they moved further inward, all of that. But then they found that they could no longer continue with their occupations because the salinity of the water had increased to such a level that it could no longer support agriculture or even support growing, grass for fodder for their animals. As a result, this village, which was once fairly prosperous, landed up, and they didn't have any means of employment. They were given houses by the government, but they couldn't really find sources of employment. So today, there's hardly anybody staying there. Most of the youngsters like Charan and company, they have moved as migrant labor to Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra, right? So the point we are making is, which of these stories will create an impact, right? Would you rather just have facts and figures thrown at you, or tell me how, what, why something happened with the help of an anecdote, a real story, right? This makes an impact. You can visualize, somebody staying far away from the sea, that suddenly you find one fine day in 2005, your house is gone, there's nothing remaining, you're moving. It's so evocative, right? A lot of images come up, and then you can relate to that and say, okay, what can I do? How can we prevent this? So that's what we're trying to say, why telling a story is important. It can be even when somebody's coming for a job interview, and many of you are in senior roles, you've probably interviewed people. How would you feel if a candidate came in and while interviewing him or her, the person just narrates, just tells you everything that is there on the CV, right? I worked in so many companies, I did this, I increased sales by 6%, I did this, I did this, I did this. It's all there in the CV. Why have him there for him or her there for an interview? The idea is because you're trying to see who is this person who's come. And it's only when that person is able to, reveal the authentic person. Who am I? Why? Or if I've achieved something, how did I achieve? Did I achieve that in the midst of a crisis? Did I do something else? Those are the stories that will stay with you and remember that candidate. So a story is important in every facet of our lives.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Geeta. You want to say?
So very often we are told, what is your elevator pitch? And before we get into why not to use a story or when not to use a story, when we talk in the context of storytelling, and corollary to that, an immediate application of that is your ability to sell something or someone, including yourself, to somebody you want to impress with a set of facts and information and emotions, but making it so precise that you're able to relate this while you still have the attention. Nobody has the time to listen to 15, 20-minute stories anymore, not even your grandchildren or children, right? So then what we're looking for is your ability to be so precise and to the point in what you're conveying and yet be able to create the same impact. When they say elevator pitch, what they're essentially saying is, if you had the opportunity to be with the CEO of your company or global CEO of your company while you're coming down from the top of the tower to the ground floor, and you did just the two of you in the elevator, what are you going to say to that person so that your CEO remembers you forever? Or the same thing for a new prospective client. If you're talking about your product or services or yourself, what would you say that will leave an impact and that will create an interest in you, your product, your services, in the other person? That's what the story here is in our corporate lives, right? But then we take it to the other extreme. It can be a put-off factor as well. Unless it serves a purpose, a story can be a drag. Yeah. So therefore, we also want to call out when not to use a story. It's not a panacea. It's not meant for everything and everyone. It's not for all the situations. We recognize as we age, we have a tendency to bring up our stories in the context of reliving our moments. Does the audience care all the time? In fact, it sometimes smells of bragging, self-glorification. Watch out for that. Yeah. Same thing. Some people are more extroverted and therefore, given the mic, it's very difficult to take it away from them. Again, something to watch out because it has exactly the reverse impact of what you want it to be. Attention seeking, we all recognize. But unless there is a reason for you to say what you're saying as a story, it's not required. We ramble. We tend to ramble, and therefore, unless you have a story that's already crisp in your head and you worked on it, mindless ramble is not a good idea. Again, it has exactly the opposite effect. It's not something that you could resort to in a hostile environment right up front to say, here is peace, truce, because I have something very nice and emotional to say. No, it doesn't work. Because people are not in a position, you don't have the right audience at that point of time. We also, without knowing it, without meaning it, repeat the same stories over and over again with the same set of people, right? You have the effect you've had on the first instance will just totally go away the second, third, and the fourth instance. So be mindful of that. You can repeat the same story with different audiences. As mentors, that's what we do day in and day out, right? Every time we talk to our mentees, we're not telling them what to do. We're sharing our stories with them so that they can pick up things that have worked for us or not worked for us, but packaged in an anecdote that shows the context that they can relate to. But if we were to share the same stories with the same set of people again and again, it would have no impact. So we'll have to create that. And eventually, if it's not relatable, obviously it's not the right place. And sometimes people go off track with that in terms of introducing humor or just making it sound very cool. You just, again, put off the audience. So mindful of all of these, which is why we've called it out. Very basic, but still we need a reminder here and there. Let's not forget, a story is not an end in itself. It's a communication tool. It's a means to an end. Yeah. What is the end is the impact, the messaging that you want to convey. And if you use it rightly, it does that. If you don't use it, it can be counterproductive as well. Yeah. A few tips about how do we propose we go about it. We understand it's an art, but it's also a science and something that we all can practice and work on. In fact, most people, as you go higher in a corporate hierarchy, you will actually get aids support to help you with the skill. You get external experts to help you build the skill. Sometimes you outsource it, but it's not such a fantastic idea. You want to keep it to yourself because you want to personalize it, but it can be acquired. Yeah, especially if you've had a very strong technical background and this is not an area of your strength, then you can definitely practice it. And here are some 3 simple things that we've spoken about. One is to just know your audience. Like we said earlier, it has to be appropriate. If your audience has seen a bunch of people who have more experiences than you do in this area that you're talking about, and you're trying to build interest by sharing a story, which is just a tip of the iceberg, not a good idea. So knowing your audience and working to that. And conversely, if you had a very young bunch of people, you're talking about things that are going totally above their head, not a good idea. So understand what that is, which is why in any session we do, we like to know who the people will be in that session so that we can work to that profile, right? Quite intuitive. Appropriateness of the story, of course, and we'll talk about that. What is a story box? And this sounds like hard work, but it isn't. I don't know how many of us here in this group are used to the idea of journaling, but as people who journal, you have ready access to a repository of stories, your emotions, what happened, how did it make me feel, what was the circumstance, what did I do about it, and how did I come out of it? Essentially, a lot of people use those. You might have, some people have photographic memories, they remember and retain a lot. But others, people like me, I need to be documenting anything to be able to remember that. And so a journaling exercise or just keeping a repository of things, especially if you believe that this is a skill set that will help you or you want to acquire, journaling is a good idea. It keeps you honest to the facts of the case and you are able to recall the emotions and what really happened. So that's your story box to say from that box, you're able to pick up what's relevant. And usually even the most senior speakers and the most popular speakers actually rehearse it. The stories are not as impromptu as they turn out to be in that moment, but they've rehearsed it and it's made relevant to that audience. So pick out stories that are relevant when you're rehearsing for a public presentation or public speech. Making sure you create the arc of your story. What does it look like? Where it started, where it ended. Have a finite storyline. Make sure the characters are relatable and authentic. Have your facts. Everything up here is extremely basic, but thoughtful, deliberate. Yeah. Have your facts ready. If it's not authentic, people don't trust what you're saying, you lose credibility. So the story shouldn't be for the sake of story and come out a great storyteller. It should be about conveying the right facts that you know are authentic. The body language and the eye contact. Oh my God, the eye contact is one thing. And I know in the virtual world, it can be very difficult. Even so, when you are stuck with the situation that you have 20 people, 30 people on the call with all their videos off, it's almost like you're talking to yourself, right? And that's increasingly getting difficult. But it was initially very convenient for people to work from home or any other place in the world, but they at least keep their videos on just for the sake of building that connect. Now, even that is a stretch. Asking people to turn the videos on can be a stretch. So that's another area where it's essential that we have a certain amount of connect with our eyes, body, to be able to relate to the audience and see how the audience is relating back to what you're saying. Practicing, it sounds like, oh, really, do I have to do this? I'm so much. I can tell you throughout my career, this is something that's helped. One, in terms of having points, a cue card, wherein you know this is what I want to share there. If I'm addressing the global board, I know that I can't go off track, and therefore having a cue card that keeps me straight on the facts of the case. Practicing it a few times so that you know you're delivering it right. It will not do you any harm. It should not be below dignity to practice this because the impact is so significant. And finally, there is no story which is going to be meaningful unless there is a call to action. Why did you say this? What do you expect? So what? Which is why if we capture all of this into what makes for a good story in very simple 4 terms, the context, why are you saying this? What happened? Why is it relatable? That's the first important thing. Unless you set the context right up front, you get off on track for a long story, people lose you, or you will lose people rather. So building the context right up front is important. Don't assume people know why you're telling a story or what it is all about. The second is the appropriateness and authenticity, and we've just spoken about that. The authenticity in the current world, the authenticity is easy to check. In fact, day before I was researching on Sudha Murthy, funnily enough, I came across this LinkedIn post where this person had put up a story about how this little girl from nowhere was sponsored for education by this lady. And then when she grew up, this little girl grew up, she was in the US, and she, you know, bumped into this other person who was sponsored at education, so on and so forth, to say that this girl who was sponsored was Sudha Murthy, and, you know, here she is. And there were multiple posts there saying, you know what, you get your facts straight. This lady is not Sudha Murthy. This is a story by Sudha Murthy, and she'd written that in her storybook. Can you imagine you going on a public podium with everybody having access to your stories or whatever you're writing and not getting your facts straight? Yeah, so very important we get that right. The proof points essentially mean, what are you conveying? The story was not all about the flesh. The bones have to be there. What is a fact? What are you trying to convey? The story that Geeta talked about, global warming. What are you conveying? You're conveying a message with some facts saying that if this does not happen, likely by this time, this is what will happen to your village. Because we have evidence, empirical evidence of that. So those proof points are the reason why you are conveying the story, but you are packaging it in a fashion that the other person is able to relate to it, and it's easy to remember. And then the final thing is, so what? What do you expect from your audience? Why are you saying this? What is the point? What is the call to action? If you're presenting somebody to an audience, what do you expect from them? Actually, more and more often, people expect to call out very strict, clearly. Even if you're making a sales presentation, instead of just ending with how great my product or service is, it's always good to end with, I'm hoping, I'm very confident that this is what in line with what your organization is looking for, and here's what I believe why. And hopefully we can take this forward such that we can integrate this product and service into your organization. Now, even though it's basic and implicit, but calling it out completes the conversation and the messaging. Yeah, so this is what we say we believe makes for a good story. And I keep saying this, and I'll say it one more time, very intuitive and basic, but being deliberate, intentful, and purposeful is what we're calling out through this conversation. I'm mindful of time, so we have used up 40 minutes by now, Saloni. Geeta, you want to add anything, and then we can pause for Q&A thereafter.
Geeta, just that there is no getting around the fact that doing all of that, keeping all of that in mind, you need to keep practicing the story and practicing the story for different audience. For instance, if you were relating the story of a movie that you've just seen, right? You can do that for 2 hours. If you were, doing that with your young niece or nephew, with everything with sound effects and, फिर villain आया, फिर ऐसे किया, all of that, right? The same thing can be, if you were telling a friend who's planning to see the movie, you'd probably say, it's about this, this. You can do that in 2 lines, and the entire range in between 2 lines in 2 hours. So it's very important that, especially in the professional context, when you're preparing for a story, apart from knowing your audience, etc., practice the story and let somebody who is, a confidant or somebody hear the story and tell you how that, it's almost like a script writing session, right? So you say, here's the story that I'm going to present. Tell me, give me your feedback, and listen when people tell you that it's too long, it's too complicated, you're going all over the place, all of that. So it's about practicing, and it's also about sharing that story before you actually present it on the stage.
Absolutely. And I know in this group we have a couple of people, at least I'm aware of, who are experts in this area, who are actually helping senior leaders craft their stories, whether it's about putting them on LinkedIn or communicating in person. So you know it's an important skill and makes a huge difference to your brand. And therefore, taking it to that level of seriousness to say what I speak is of relevance and impacts my brand, and therefore how I carve my story is something that I want to work on consciously. It's a lifetime skill, and it's a life skill as well at the same time. So with that, we'll take on questions, or more than questions, your perspectives, your experiences, anything else that you want to bring up, and for the balance of the session here.
Thank you for that very insightful and yet very crisp session, Geeta and Geetha. I surely believe our audience here today has great takeaways. Would like to invite some comments or some questions or some sharing. Any perspectives here? Sangeeta, would you like to do that? You are still muted. Okay, Yashwant also has raised his hand. Okay.
There is a question on the chat while people are still, oh, there's somebody's raised a hand as well. So let's take the hand first and then we'll go to the chat.
Okay, Yashwant, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the great insights on storytelling, which is so powerful. And I think it can help individuals and organizations at large. So my question is, with respect to the impact of storytelling. So often in business, when they speak to the leaders in the corporates, right? So they are talking only about the tangible part of it, right? So what is the business out of it at the end of the day, right? And even if there is a business, right, sense to it, how do we actually measure it so that the leaders that we are connecting with are in sync with what we are actually looking at to create an impact?
So it's a good question. Like we said at some point, stories are not for every time and everyone. However, it is a way of communicating that you believe the audience is going to receive well. So if you're living in an environment where there is going to be a need for just, cut and dry information, I need to know the facts, I need to know exactly what happened here, I need to know exactly the root cause analysis, et cetera, et cetera. In that environment, you will present that even though you will still try to build a context to it, right? If there's, let's say, an issue with a customer, et cetera, instead of just putting a customer escalation, if you know there is a reason, a technical issue or some human issue, that you could build a context with, you will do that. What we're saying about storytelling is that as you communicate about yourself, about a situation, about your product and services, build a certain level of context and visualization. That visualization can be applied to most circumstances, including the one that you're talking about. What you might have to look for is this the right place to talk about the emotional? This may not be a time to talk about the emotional side of this, right? This is a situation where somebody is really aggrieved, and therefore, instead of trying to tell them how we had a human issue, this, that, and the other, you really want to get to the facts of the case and work, showing empathy to the audience. So in our business interactions, very often we are in the first instance, you want the facts of the case. As a leader, just cut the chase and get me the facts of the case, right? And that's important at that point in time. But as you start to look at those facts of the case, the next level of communication has to be with context and visualization and more details in there. So it might be a step 2 in certain circumstances and not a step 1. What we're saying is that these circumstances might warrant, case-by-case handling, of course. But in general, when you're connecting with people, with your peers, with your team members, people want to see a bit of you. And that is what we want to bring into our conversations, not the LinkedIn profile or not your CV. We want to bring a little bit of ourselves into those conversations so that there is an element of vulnerability, a humanness that the others are able to relate to. But on a by case basis, when you're dealing with specific escalations, issues, etc., you have to deal with that moment in maybe in a more objective fashion. And then the next opportunity of having a more detailed conversation, you should bring in those other elements as well. Yeah. I have a couple of questions in the chat. So, Saloni, do you want to read them out? Is that okay?
So Dr. Anchal Mishra has a question.
Yeah.
When we have few minutes to explain a critical situation in the office, how to explain or narrate?
I think that's what we were just discussing. Hopefully, Anshul, that answers your question as well. It could be a step approach. You deal with that fact without bringing in too much of fact. At the appropriate time, you bring in the relevant context as well.
We'll still go through all of those steps of that we said, but it's just that you'll have to compress it, right? And the first and the context, and most leaders who are pressed for time are going to ask you that question, so what?
Yeah, so
Tell them very clearly and crisply, I need your help for this. Rather than, going on about the story and saying, you should go in with that very clear perspective of what is it that you want out of this? What is your end purpose in telling the story?
exactly.
I need you to help with giving me more people in my team, for allowing us to work extra hours, whatever it could be, right? That's.
And also, if I may submit, so it is also giving meaning to the data, right? So many of the organizations, they have huge numbers and all, right? So for example, if there's a tractor company, right? Now they might be manufacturing, let's say 1 lakh tractor per year, right? But how do we actually create a story and then, connect it with the fact that, how many fields that tractor must have been, deployed in, right? And how, what was the impact out of that in the food production, and how many people actually fed, right? So I think that's the maybe connecting the dots. I think which is very powerful about storytelling. That's
Yeah, when you want to create a brand image, yeah, certainly you can do that as to how you are creating a revolution, let's say in the food industry, for example. There could be a story.
absolutely.
So Malama had a question, and I think it's already answered, but still I'll read it out. How do we create short and crisp content for personal branding on social media, like LinkedIn?
Well, neither of us are experts in that, but in the context of storytelling, what we've said is stay true to the facts of the case. So it's not about, just look at the proportion of bones and fat. How much do you need, right? So you want to stay lean, make sure that you're staying true to the facts, and the story is just to make sure you're packaging it. It is, and remember those points we said about what not to do in storytelling. It shouldn't be about bragging. It shouldn't be about self-glorification. So what is the purpose of this? To begin with, it takes an iterative process. And thankfully, when it comes to written communication, we have the opportunity, right? So very often people involve other people in checking on whether this is making sense, does this appeal to the audience? So if you have people with good judgment around you, you can help you with that, practice that. It's very common. And I was talking to a colleague yesterday. There are multiple people who are providing that support at a professional level. See, even with the organization, you have PR people, you have communications, internal communication, external communications people. Partly their job is to make sure that when the leader says something, it is said in the right fashion, at least the written words. And even they script the verbal thing very often, right? So using another resource who can help you look at that to say, is it making sense or not, is a good idea. And eventually, we're living in a market economy. The popularity of your post, the response you get to that will give you immediate real-time feedback. So make sure that you're listening and keeping your ears close to that, because it's not something to get offended by or look for. It's just that if it has made an impact, was it relevant, is something that at least in the social media, you get to see instantly as well. But practice it, keep true to the agenda. That let's not get into self-glorification through social media, which unfortunately seems to be the norm, but that's something we have to remind ourselves of.
Okay,
and with attention spans, declining, it's very important that Geeta said iterations, right? So keep working on it too. Within the first 2-3 minutes, if you can I'm saying minutes here, but I mean when somebody's reading, if they can figure out who you are and what you are, right? What is the unique you? I'll share a 30-second example. Yesterday, my son shared his CV with me, late in the night, and I called him up and I said, "Who are you?" And he thought I was being literal and I got a knock on the head or something like that. So he says, "What do you mean? What happened to you?" I said, "No, who are you?" And I told him, I said, "It's not coming through, right? You may have done X, Y, Z, but nothing. You've got 4 years of work experience." I said, I don't see who are you? This could be any engineer out there who's done these things, right? So I said, take the weekend off, think about who you are. And within that first 3 lines, I should be able to, if look at me as a recruiter or hirer and say, who is this person? So I think that's important to, encapsulate who you are within the first few lines. Nobody has this attention span to go through the entire thing.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, totally. So a mother who's not in a situation of going to office, but is very skilled and experienced in her industry, is not getting the opportunities because she wants to work from home. What are your views in this case? So how can storytelling help? Ramanjeet Kaur.
Actually, it may sound like a question that is not relevant entirely, but it could well be that you are not telling your story, or whoever that person is not telling her story well. Because putting up your candidature is the best form of storytelling you can do, not as something which says once upon a time, but actually your elevator pitch. What are you? Who are you? The question that Geeta just asked. When we interview people, we don't want to know what they've accomplished because we've already seen that on their CV, which is why we've called them for an interview. We want to know what you represent, what ticks you, what have you done in your life that makes you unique. And in doing that, if you're able to express you have a good narrative to say why I can't work from office. Here are my priorities. And here are the reasons why I'm good for the job, because I bring competence and skills that are so relevant. But the reality of my life, and I stick to my priorities, I'm going to be working from home because I have to tend to my little toddler, whatever it is. I think that conviction and a strong narrative is what it takes to convince somebody to say, here we need her and she will work on her own terms, we'll give her a chance. So to that extent, the storytelling is a very powerful way of communicating, or first build your narrative. This is something we take up, especially with women, is around, especially once they've taken a break, they lose confidence, they lose their ability to show how they're relevant and competent. So having that story up front, having that narrative, and then also having the conviction point to say, here is the reason why I want to work from home. In this environment, working from home is not like asking for something too big. But if that was a constraint that you were continuing, it should be done with a sense of conviction to say, my priority is this. And most organizations today, unless there was a job that cannot be done at home at all, they will respect you for that. If many of you would have seen the Tanishq ad where this lady goes for an interview after a maternity break, and she says, I've been at this life boot camp or whatever, it's this person who's had this fantastic experience. What a beautiful narrative. You may not dramatize it to that extent, but she comes with the confidence to say, here's the reason why I can't do this, and this is what I can do. Are you up for it? So again, that's an art of storytelling once again.
Without being apologetic.
Yes.
Yes. That was certainly, I think, Ramanjeet, you got your answer, and so beautifully captured and explained by Geeta. Any more last questions? I know Samina was trying to ask, though. So Samina, do you have a question? If yes, please unmute and speak. Or anyone else, please raise your hands. I know, Sangeeta, you had something to say. Now you can go ahead.
You're on mute, Sangeeta.
Oops.
Want to mute again.
Mute again. And then we will invite Samina. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
You're unmuting and muting again. So there's something wrong with the touch on the device. You have to unmute only.
Just touch once.
Done.
Yeah, done.
Hi. Thank you, Geeta ma'am, for a wonderful insight. My question here is, at times, I've heard something from my children majorly that, this I'm introduced to this new word called narcissistic. Narcissistic.
Yep.
She says, Mama, you are so narcissistic, at times. I get a lot of admiration from everyone. It is whether it is my professional profile or people around me, my family members or my friends, they all love me so much. And they are, I'm always, admired by a lot of people. So at times my daughter tells me that you are a narcissistic. So I wanted to understand that, you said you should stay true to yourself. So I tell my daughter, it is not my problem. If people like me or if everybody tells that I'm doing good. So what is the negative point in it? Like, we are, you said, do not brag about yourself. I am not bragging, or I'm not, glorifying anything at my end. But if people around me are appreciating me so much, but it goes to my children as being a narcissistic, I wanted to understand, like, how to, cover up the situation that, how should I portray myself?
Yeah. A simple answer to that, Sangeeta, will be when you do something or you perform well and people appreciate that, that's not narcissism. When you put the floodlight on that appreciation to say people are appreciating me so much, that's narcissism, right? So stay away from that floodlight, and let people appreciate what they're saying. If you continue to do good work, they'll continue to appreciate you. But the moment you bring light to the fact that people are appreciating me, that's where narcissism comes into it.
So what happens is, as a mother, throughout the day I'm out, whatever happens to me, I go back and share. I share with my children. I share and tell everything to them, what happened during the day, what were the incidents and how. So I wanted to understand that, is it a misunderstanding, or, now I have started holding on to myself before sharing anything that, probably she will feel that I am glorifying something. So
like social media, you get instant feedback from your kids as well. So I'm sure the kids have come to a point where they see too much of this feedback coming their way, which is why they're using this comment. That should be a cue for you to say, I need to cut down on this. Nothing more.
I'm nowhere on social media. I never.
No, I'm not talking about social media. I'm just saying that if your kids are hearing too much of how somebody else appreciated what I did and how beautiful they think I am, obviously the kids have gotten to a point where they make a comment that you're being narcissist by hearing too much of it, which is why we said in our slide as well, don't repeat your stories, don't put the floodlight on yourself. It is not about you. The story is not about you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And we have a great question from Mr. Malhotra. He says, how is storytelling different from case studies? Can storytelling include quotations from known personalities or otherwise?
Okay. So yes, case studies are describing the situation for people to literally visualize and then be able to give their comments on it, right?
Solution it.
That also requires an art of storytelling. It's about creating a story about a situation that you want others to have a view on and debate that. The case studies are typically given out for people to see how they would react to that. And there's usually nothing right or wrong with it. It's just to evoke different responses such that when it comes to human behavior, to say, I could have responded this way, somebody else might say, I could have responded another way, right? So you're giving out a situation for somebody to respond. A story is usually a closed loop where you're telling them what happened. It's not up for debate. It's just telling them an anecdote, something happened, this is what came out of it, this is a learning, or this is a context, right? So it's not about that. That's the only difference. But when it comes to, we all write case studies as part of what we do as mentoring. We bring storytelling in that form as well. We do that. We give it out to the mentees participants for them to then think of what they would do in that situation, which is not a close-ended loop. They could respond differently. And we discuss the pros and cons of that. That's the only thing I can think of. Yeah. And
they need not be the right and wrong answers.
Sorry. Geeta, yeah.
No, I'm saying there need not be any right and wrong answers in a case study. You're not looking, case studies are generally to get different viewpoints. When you're telling a story, there is an end, there is a destination inside, you know what you want. The other thing is case studies can be constructed, right? Stories are normally taken from real life, and they're deeply personal also. Even when I'm narrating a story about, let's say, global warming, it's because that story has had a huge impact on me.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Excellent.
including quotes from other different personalities, known personalities, I think it only embellishes the story. And any point in time, if you're able to bring a perspective from somebody who is known, respected, well regarded in that field or area, it only adds to the import of the story. So absolutely a good idea to do that for sure. Yeah. I see a hand raised by Mr. Chauhan here, Yashwant Chauhan. You want to go next?
Yeah, Ishant, I think you have another question.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the great insight. Apart from the storytelling, because a very important component of storytelling is also what the story crafting, because story is as good as its its crafting part, right? So any tips on that front can be the great story crafters, so that we we land up with the story with the right message in the day.
So we touched upon that, Yashwant, in one of the slides to say here are some tips of how you build the story. You have to have, as a starting point, you have to have some triggers of the story, right? Even when these, script writers bring up stories, there's somehow a little incident somehow that triggers the whole story, which becomes a 3-hour movie, right? So there is some starting point, and which is why we're recommending having a journal where you're putting in those kinds of incidents in your life, episodes that you've been through or observed, or something that evoked an emotion in you. Just putting those triggers is a good starting point, because a story doesn't come out of nothing. Yeah. And then being able to deliver that story or craft a story, knowing what is the message, who is the audience, what is the beginning and end of it, what do you want to relate to that, what do you want that person to take away from it, keeping it true to the facts of the case, the authenticity of it, the crispness of it, and then delivering it. You're talking about the crafting part, of course, when you deliver it also, keeping true to the facts. So the emphasis has to be on the facts of the case. The rest of it is to make sure that people are able to relate and visualize that. So we go back to the same tips. Have a starting point. A starting point is to be knowing some triggers that you need to use to be able to create a story.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're done for the day. I'd like to now invite Mr. Tyagarajan, Executive Director of FMA.
Mute, Mr. Tyagarajan. Yeah.
Hi, good evening, participants, and thanks for allowing me to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Faridabad Management Association. It was indeed a very interesting session. It was supported by a lot of illustrations, and special mention was made to Sudha Murthy also, and also about the fossils. Also, a very interesting presentation was made about the climate change, and storytelling itself is very effective. Even the news channels also create stories and make the news very interesting. Even they make the fake news very interesting. And thanks, Ms. Geeta Jain and Ms. Geetha Rajeev, you have presented it in a very interesting manner, and our members had a very great learning. And thank you very much. And thanks. It was a very superb session, an excellent session, and our members enjoyed it. And also thanks to the audience for sparing their valuable time. And thank you very much. Thanks. We would like to have more sessions like this in future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been a very interactive audience, and that too on a Friday evening. We really appreciate
very
that.
interactive audience. A lot of questions and also very smart way of answering them. very well handled. QA sessions were very well handled. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend ahead, all of you. Appreciate your time here. Thank you.
All the very best.
All the very best.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
everyone. Have a
Bye.
good
For
weekend.
more enriching experiences and sessions like this.
You're most
Thank you, Samina ji.
Samina, you're
welcome.
Okay.
yeah.